Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are taking a look at the new and updated ORBAT for the Enlightened, which was updated along with all of the ORBATs late August 2022. The Enlightened in the dystopian age is one enormous faction that doesn't really consist of any smaller nations working together to form a powerful union, so this is actually a quite long ORBAT to go through, so buckle up, we're doing this. When we're looking at one of these factions, the first thing we do is check out all of the special rules that they have, and for the Covenant we are checking out the different action qualities that they have. These used to be known as weapon qualities for those players who have been around for longer, and the first special rule is called agitation. They have a number of weapons where the number of dice that you get depends on the mass of the ship you are targeting. For instance, a Sturginium agitator in the point blank range has a dice value called mass times 4. So if you're shooting at a mass 2 target, you would be getting 8 dice. If you're shooting at a mass 3 target, you would get 12 dice, and so on and so on. However, there is a small little caveat being added now to sort of keep it from going out of proportion. If the target model has a mass of 4 or greater, they are still being treated as max mass 4 for this purpose. So if you're targeting an Ice Maiden, which is a mass 6 ship, you're still going to get a healthy number of dice, don't get me wrong, but it is being capped somewhat just to prevent you from one-shotting these big flagships in one go. Apart from the different weapon qualities, you get the Covenant special rules, and the Covenant being the high-tech faction does mean that there's quite a lot of these compared to different nations as well. The first one is called Enlightened Science, and that one means that if you're making a repair test, if you get an exploding hit result, normally an exploding hit doesn't do anything during repairs, you get to remove a single point of damage from that model. However, the model needs to be battle ready in order to do so, and a model cannot remove more than a single point of damage with this rule per activation. Repair tests can therefore be made on models that do not have any levels of disorder or critical damage markers if you want to, because you can always attempt to repair that point of damage if you're an Enlightened player, because you've got the best engineers in the world pretty much in your faction. Furthermore, which is an advantage they have, instead of suffering a generator shutdown critical damage result, they may always trade that in for a Sturginium flare instead. However, a Sturginium flare does cause you to take damage as per usual, so be careful with this rule. You will also notice that the number of generators in the Enlightened fleet as we go down this ORBAT deep dive has been reduced by quite a bit, so yeah, don't use this rule willy-nilly this time around. The other new rule that they specifically get is groupthink piloting. That means that their SRS tokens are quite hard to intercept because they just throw themselves into incoming fire with no thought towards their own survival. So normally, if SRS attack you, you get to make an interception roll, allowing you to shoot down one of the attacking aircraft for every 3 counters that you score. For the Enlightened though, your opponent making the interceptions will require 4 counters to do so, so they're pretty hard to remove. However, that comes at a cost, because the SRS tokens from units with this rule cannot gain weight of fire, meaning the Enlightened will be very hard to intercept. But, on the other hand, you're gonna have a very hard time removing enemy escort tokens, because weight of fire is now the more guaranteed way of removing those in-game, and the Enlightened have a hard time doing that with their SRS tokens, so be wary of that one. I've made a video about the biggest ORBAT changes coming in August, and heavy firepower was one of them, so if you want to learn more about them, I'm going to refer to that video instead. It means that you can make 3 lead weapon attacks when determining your action dice pool, which is pretty much the same as other factions have. This used to be their own unique rule, but that was changed because it now better suits with heavy firepower. Another very unique thing is the luminiferous defenses. You can actually always make a type of defense roll, or practically always make one, when you're using Enlightened ships. Because units with this rule may use a defense action dice pool equal to their crippled ADV value to defend against any attack with the gunnery, broadside or fusillade qualities. And those tend to be the weapons where you don't get to make a defense roll at all. So you can still do so, albeit with your crippled ADV value. And this defense action dice pool cannot be increased higher than that crippled ADV. So if you've got teammates or escorts or anything along those lines, they're not going to boost up your luminiferous defenses. Things can't roll out of control this way, so don't try to cheese this one. Just be happy that you get some defense against that one. And another thing that was changed, the Enlightened have a rule called Wave Lurker, and any model with this rule may plunge into a shallow dive during the special operations step of the activation. That's called Wave Lurking. That unit reduces its speed by 3, so you're going significantly slower, and replaces the surface unit position trait for the submerged unit position trait until the end of the special operations step of their next activation. That means you can't use this one twice back to back, so you can become a submerged unit for essentially one turn, but you have to become a surface unit again in the next one. Additionally, attacks from wave lurking models only count single hits from heavy hits, so you're doing that at the expense of speed and firepower. But if you become submerged, you have to remember that you will become obscured instead, and you can do nifty things like moving through models or no longer blocking line of sight if that was a problem. So it is a neat little rule that you can use as an Enlightened player, but it's not necessarily mega overpowered anymore. And you have to remember that if you start wave lurking, your ADV drops down to 1, meaning that if you were being targeted by SRS tokens, you can be in big trouble if you're using this rule. Moving on to the different battle fleets you can select. Well, there's been a few general changes that were already in the big rulebook, but they are restated again in the different ORBATs. A battle fleet now has a couple of restrictions, one of them being that you can't include more than one of any specific unit, so spamming a unit is no longer possible. You cannot include more than one unit with a flagship trait, that was a thing that already existed before. And in addition to the flagship, you cannot include more than one unit with the aerial, so a flying unit, or more than one unit with a submerged trait. So you can't spam flyers and submarines in any of these battle fleets unless stated otherwise. And if you want to use the attached unit rules, you do have to use them within the same battle fleet as well. You will notice that in general, as the ORBAT changes video is made, says that you will get way less benefits from the new battle fleets than you did before, so keep that in the back of your mind. This wasn't just nerfed for the Enlightened, this was generally nerfed for every single faction. Command Override is one of those new benefits, and that one has been changed. That used to be a command reroll, but that one interacted slightly badly with abilities that already allowed you to do rerolls, because if you used an ability that already allowed for rerolls, you can use Command Override again, or Command Reroll again. Command Override you can though, because you actually cancel the whole dice pool. So if this battle fleet has this rule, once per encounter the player may declare they are using the battle fleet's Command Override to immediately just cancel all the dice results in one action dice pool generated by a unit in this force, obviously. The Command Override must be played before any manipulation of the action dice pool actually takes place by either player. So if you roll really badly and you just notice like, I'd have to be really lucky to salvage this roll, that's when you use the Command Override. But because of how a cancel result, you just ignore everything, you still get to use your reroll abilities, such as Sustained, which is an important one for the Enlightened, to benefit the new roll, if you will. So Command Override is now way more useful for the Enlightened in general. And then the Visitor Ambush is incredibly wordy now, because it now explains that you can create that special stack of tokens, and it has to explain how the whale tokens, the visitor tokens, now work. There's no such thing anymore as a special SRS, these are just other tokens which follow their own rules. And I'm skipping this bit now. If you're interested to learn what this one is, jump to the timeline of the Descartes battle fleet and I will go through that one with you there. When we're looking at the Enlightened battle fleet, very much like every other generic faction battle fleet, it just doesn't include any bonuses at all, and it's just one flagship along with 4 other units with the Enlightened trade. But yeah, don't expect to get any bonuses from that one, and keep in mind the limitations that we just mentioned earlier. The other things that they've now got, there's a few rewordings in this one. The Archimedes battle fleet is finally available because the Archimedes ship has come out, and you do get that new Command Override ability, giving you that powerful reroll ability, and the ability to include more than one unit of Antarctica, Tacitus or Ulysses class ships. And that means that, yeah, this one does have a bit more flexibility in should you want to spam any of those units. It's, well, no surprise really that the Antarctica, Tacitus and Ulysses class units are the ones that you can actually spam in this battle fleet, because they are also the mandatory ones. A new one is the Cetacean battle fleet, which is led by a Descartes class, which is the type of class that launches whale tokens, or now orca tokens. You have to include the Vesalius class unit, which is out as well, and that is the smaller cruiser-sized whale token launcher unit, and then you can pick a further 3 units with the Enlightened trait. The big bonus to that one is you do get that whale ambush through this Cetacean battle fleet, and you can include more than 1 unit of the Claudius class or the Vesalius class, so there's some levels of spammability within this themed battle fleet as well. The Hypathia battle fleet has been changed as well. You must include 1 flagship with the Hypathia class, that's quite normal, and you have to include either a Lovelace or a Tacitus unit, which are your main battle line cruiser, or the main advanced cruiser, and you can take a further 3 units with the Enlightened trait. Now, you may take more than one of the same unit if it has a generator. This excludes an entropic generator, by the way. This is way more flexible, because you used to only be able to spam units that already came with a generator, and you can't do that one. But you're allowed to spam the units that take generators, which makes it a way more usable and way more flexible list. And you still get your whale ambush as well to go along with it. So there's way better bonuses, and the Hypathia battle fleet has really been bumped up. The Autonomous Research battle fleet now includes the limitation that you have to take a non-unique flagship unit. So you can't take one of the special name variants that you find in the list below. And you have to include one of the new ships, the Zumina or the Origins, which have been added with the advanced classes, or the old tried and trusted Claudius unit have to be in there. And from that point on, you get to spam automata units. You must include one of them with the automata trait, and then you can include a further 2 units with the automata traits as well, with the bonus that you may include 2 units of the same type if they are automata, and you still get that nifty little command override on top of that. And as all fleets, factions do, you get access to the traditional mercenary battle fleets, but they will be discussed when we're discussing their ORBATs, so I refer to those videos. If you do want to see those videos in the future, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for that future update as well. Now, on to some of the fun stuff that the Enlightened have. They are known for having a lot of different technological advances, and you can definitely notice that when checking out the outfitting yards. The first one is the Callimachus chronolathe, which is something that you can find on the new Archimedes class Mass 4 ship. And what does it do? Well, during the special operations step of the unit's activation, it can use the chronolathe to immediately remove a point of damage from a single battle-ready model within 15 inch, which is great because you can just use it as a repair platform, and furthermore as a valor effect during the reserve step, so you do have to play a card for it and your opponent can cancel it. It can be used to immediately bring a unit from reserve and deploy them within 3 inch of this unit. The unit brought from reserve immediately receives a hazard condition, but may activate normal as you would during that turn. A model may not be wave lurking while using the chronolathe, and the device is unaffected by a generator offline critical damage. This can be potentially very, very damaging for your opponent, because the Enlightened really do have a lot of weapons that can perform really, really well on short range, and putting some smaller units like Marians in reserve to only bring them in via things like an Archimedes can really hurt if you do it well as a commander, so it's a very interesting option. The Chaos Orb is the other big thing that you can get on those Mass 4 Archimedes type ships, and that one says during the special operation steps of this unit's activation, it can use the Chaos Orb to draw 3 Victory and Valor cards, you can examine them, discard 2 and keep 1 for the rest of the turn, so you get an extra card with the added benefit that you can select out of 3 of them. And during the end phase, the player must discard a card of their choice from their hand, so you can't just cheekily use it for a better initiative value as well, because you do have to dump it during the end phase. Furthermore, as a Valor effect in the shooting phase, you can still use this device as a heavy particle cannon with a 360-degree fire arc. So again, you do have to use a card to do so, but this is on top of the already getting an extra card as well. You can't be wave lurking when using the orb, much like the chronolathe, and generator offline doesn't affect it. So yep, that's 2 very strong additions to this roster. And then on to some more funky stuff. These 3 that I mark now, the Gravitonic Imperilator, the Heavy Particle Cannon, and the Magneto Encapsulator, are 3 new, relatively large, sort of round weapons that you can fit instead of the position of all of those other big heavy particle cannon, it seems, looking through this ORBAT. And the first of this one is the Gravitronic Imperilator. It distorts gravity around the initial target, so you attack with it as normal. If the initial target suffers a point of damage, then the unit making the attack may use a Valor effect. So you first have to damage, and then you can use a Valor effect against the initial target. As the Valor effect, the initial target is affected depending on its position trait. If the unit is a surface or a skimming unit, it is lifted into the air before crashing down into the water, and the initial target suffers a catastrophic explosion, which is pretty bad. If the initial target is a submerged unit or a ground unit, the effect is more damaging still, and it suffers 2 catastrophic explosions. So you really want to be aiming this at submarines, and when they do arrive, ground units. And if the initial target is an aerial unit, you can't really make it suffer any more additional damage because they'll just be able to stop before they hit the surface. But they receive a level of disorder and they can be turned in any facing of the attacker shooting. So if you're shooting at one of those fancy new blimps coming in, you can just turn them around because you've affected gravity around them too much. Seems like a heap of fun if you're playing with the Enlightened, so I'm really liking this weapon. The Heavy Particle Cannon is the heavy particle cannon we know and love, which is now a blast weapon, but attacks using the heavy particle cannon are pretty much resolved as normal, and furthermore a unit making the attack with can make a Valor effect if the initial target has any Enlightened SRS tokens in base contact. And as that Valor effect, you may discard one or more of the SRS tokens to just add 2 extra die to the attack action dice pool of that attack. And you have to remember, you make one initial attack with a blast weapon that just affects all of the targets caught in that blast. So if you're just playing it very well with those SRS tokens, you can make one hell of a monstrous blast out of them. This rule kind of replaces the old tri-kobold fuel that the Enlightened used to have, but it's now sort of rolled into as a Valor effect as well. And then the third one in that trio is the Magneto Encapsulator. What does the Magneto Encapsulator do? In this case, if the initial target suffers 1 or more points of damage, again, you have to first do damage, and you can then use the Valor effect, affecting all of the models touched by the blast that was launched by the attack. Just the initial target, by the way, that needs to suffer a point of damage, not every single one in the blast. Then as the Valor effect goes, any model touched by the blast templates are moved towards the center of the blast template in the order of the attacker's choosing, so they're all just sucked towards each other as a magnetic effect. Usually this will cause collisions with another model. Any intervening terrain between the center of the blast and the moving model is collided with instead. So if there's like an outskirt of an island, think Florida-esque, then it's going to collide with that one, of course. Resolve all collisions in the order of the attacker's choosing, because you do have to make disengagements after them. Then each moving model completes any disengaging model and moves their drift value, resolving any further collision this causes. So they all get drawn together, you do your disengage where you can turn up to 90 degrees if you so desire, and then you can drift apart. It's just so fun that you just blonk them all together, and then the opponent can just decide to do what their ship, or just try and untangle the mess this Magneto Encapsulator has made. So that one again seems like a heap of fun. It might be something that takes a while to resolve, but again, if it's that funny, I don't think any Enlightened can really spam this weapon, so having something that takes a while to resolve isn't all that bad. And then the last thing that they have are Lamarckian barracks, and that's for some assault vehicles where they've got the most powerful creatures on board to launch their attacks, and they have these sustained, hazardous and devastating qualities when they launch an assault. So some of these ships actually are specialized in better assaults if they have these Lamarckian barracks. Next up are the different Enlightened generators, and there have been some very noticeable changes, and let's not mince words, they're nerfs. For the large part. They still get all of the traditional generators that you would from other nations like the Atomic, the Fury and all of these things, but they get a unique one which is called the Clone Generator, and then if you've got any generators in a unit, you can target another unit within 12 inch that has the basic Atomic Fury, Magnetic Repulsion Shield or Shroud generator, and then count as having that generator for the turn. So they can just copy something off of someone else, but they can't copy any of the special generators from the other nations anymore. So that in and of itself is a bit of a nerf. But the clone generator is incredibly flexible, provided that you have different generators spread out in your fleet, or your opponent is using some of the standard generators. The magnetic generator has also been changed slightly. It's once per activation, this model may target an aerial unit within 10 inch, and the closest model in that unit receives a level of disorder. And this one is a big one now with the buff to SRS. Any hits or heavy hits by enemy SRS against this model must be rerolled. So I can imagine some more magnetic generators showing up in the future, especially for Enlightened players, because they do have the generator ships to use them in, and they can go for the full defensive loadout, which is still incredibly strong. Shroud generator is now obscured, as you know, but the big one, and that is a bit of a nerf if you will, is this one, the entropic generator. Every ship in the Enlightened arsenal used to be armed with an internal generator, and it caused a bit of a rules mess because you really had to track which unit had which internal generator, and yeah, they've done away with that. They just gave them this new entropic generator, and what does it do? An attack against a model with an entropic generator must cause a number of hits greater than the model's armor attribute, rather than equal to or greater, to cause a point of damage. So if you have armor 6 and your enemy manages to just barely hit that 6 with an attack, yeah, that doesn't do any damage, you need to roll a 7. However, if the number of hits exceeds that armor value, it has no effect on the attack. So it's not like you get +1 armor, you just, yeah, you're slightly better off, well, very much better off if your opponent only manages to reach that single armor breakpoint. If you've got armor 6 and your opponent scores 12 hits on you, well, this generator doesn't do anything, it'll just cause 2 points of damage as you'd expect. But it can come in clutch, because if some opponents are just trying to hit you with multiple small attacks, that's really going to quickly backfire, because this entropic generator can be found on many different ships within the Enlightened, so it's not all bad, definitely not. Moving on to the weapons, you will see quite a lot of different weapons in here, mostly because there's also new flying ships introduced in there, and new automata ramming creatures. The Ketos and the Lothan assault machines are really beefed up and amped up, so there's quite a lot to go through with these ones. And you will notice that quite a few of these weapons have now got extra dice added on top of them. Noticeably, the particle beamer, which is the first one I want to highlight. It's now chucking way more dice than it used to, because sustained was changed. So because sustained was quite nerfed in this expansion, in this 3.03 version, they did up the number of dice you throw on a particle beamer. And why am I highlighting this weapon? You will notice that it still shoots just as well as it does on long range as it does on closing range. So the particle beamer is now also an excellent anti-air weapon. Keep that in the back of your head, because this future of dystopian wars is going to have way more flying ships in there, and the humble particle beamer is still very much your friend when it comes to that one. And the other traditional weapon that they used to be able to have was the big pulse emitter, this one. The pulse emitter still has the same number of dice, but it's now got the very interesting duo of sustained and fusillade. So if you're able to get into close range, point blank range I should say, you can still pretty much reroll whatever you please with this pulse emitter, making it a very effective weapon still at point blank range. And with the combination of sustained and fusillade, you pretty much already are at what the old sustained used to be, so I thought it would be interesting to highlight this one as well. And speaking of sustained, because sustained is now no longer as strong as it used to be, the torpedo salvos on cruisers or things like Diogenes submarines have now been changed to have this new keyword of sustained, meaning that you can reroll any of the results on your dice that you don't like. So if you think you've rolled way too many single counters, you can just reroll that result, and that makes this weapon a lot more devastating than it previously was. So it's very much worth the torpedoes from the Enlightened have gone from nearly useless a year ago to being some of the best you can get in the game. Do mind though that their torpedoes do not have the extreme range capability, so you do want to get closer to your enemy than any other nation would when firing torpedoes. Other than that, yep, you can go over it. There's multiple agitation style weapons now, ranging from the smallest type being the caloric oscillator, going all the way to the Sturginium agitator that we knew before, and now the even heavier version of that one called a Sturginium atomizer, which pretty much act like a Sturgeonian agitator, even in closing range. So that can really put the hurt on, especially since it gets the blast rule. So if you're targeting this at a flagship that has a few smaller ships around it, that can really backfire, because the initial target is the one that determines the number of dice. It then gets devastating on top of that one, and it gets piercing on top of that one. So if you've got one of those typical flagships being escorted with some smaller mass 1 ship, this Sturgeonian atomizer is really the type of weapon that will ruin that Commodore's day really quickly. So keep that in mind if you're playing against the Enlightened as well. If you see that weapon, be careful where you place your well, now attached units, I should say. And now, after that very long introduction of all the special rules that they have, we can finally move on to the different flagships. And for this section, I have actually included some pictures of all of the models. Some of them aren't painted up yet, but you can at least see the models as they are shown on the website as well. I got a bit of feedback from new players that they thought it was very difficult to understand what ship was what model as well. And I also think that including the pictures sort of helps to help players see what the ships are itself. If you look at the Archimedes, for instance, it comes with 4 different particle cannons. One of them, as you can see, is able to aim all the way in a 270-degree fire arc. The ones on each side, there's one on the other side, but you can't see it in the picture of course, is able to shoot at the front and to the side. Same with this one, front and side. And then there's one aimed 270 degrees towards the back, meaning this ship has 3 ideal firing arcs, being the side firing arc, as you can stack the front one, the back one and the side one, and you can do that for either port or starboard. Or it has an ideal front facing arc, where you can stack the 2 side facing weapons along with the front facing weapon. The one arc that you do not want to engage with this ship with is the aft arc, because you've only got one single weapon that's able to shoot at that angle. And that's a handy thing to know, that this ship has a 270-degree ideal firing arc, because that means you can very much put your heavy firepower rule that it has the perfect use. And this one comes with that very fun little chronolath, allowing you to do that shenanigans for bringing in reserves as well, that you can change out for the Chaos Orb, giving it another heavy particle cannon if you want to use the Valor effect, or it's the one that allows you to do a bit of card shuffling shenanigans as well. And seeing how this ship is only 388 points, it doesn't really hurt all that much to upgrade it to the Diophantus Chaos Orb. You do have to keep in mind though that it is an experimental design, a temperamental design, so jury-rigged repairs, the ones that you do at the very end phase, are not an option with this ship. So if you take a lot of debuffs with this, they do tend to stay. Another thing that you will notice with the Enlightened flagships is that their armor has been brought down to only be armor 7, meaning they rely even more on their Enlightened science and luminiferous defenses to keep them going. And with that distribution of 8 hull points in each profile, both in battle ready and crippled profile, you can, push them into crippled relatively easily compared to other flagships from different nations. However, you sort of have to, because if you don't, there's a good chance that they start repairing themselves through Enlightened science and all of that stuff. So if you're going to be making a move against these Enlightened flagships, if you're facing them, do so with a lot of conviction, because doing half-assed work against these Enlightened flagships could really go bad very quickly because of how they can repair. Other than that though, incredibly interesting entry, and yeah, can't wait to get my hands on that box to give it a go. Next up, we have the cousin, if you will, of the Archimedes, which is called the Schneider, which is the named version of the Archimedes class ship. It's incredibly similar in terms of fire arcs, so if you're just skipping to this part of the video, make sure you check out the Archimedes as well. But it's got Sturginium agitators on as replacements for the particle cannons, and it gets a nifty little rule to get even more out of them through the agitation harmonizer, which gives you more dice, an extra 2 dice pools, and the sustained quality. That's the big one. They gain sustained when you're using agitation weapons. You mustn't forget you can't use agitation weapons along with the heavy firepower rule, so this is a bit of a dud as well. And a very big one why you want to consider the Schneider, because it is a very big bump up in points. It's nearly 90 points more for an upgraded Diophantus Chaos Orb and the Sturginium agitators. But you have to look at this one, it also gets Fortunes of War. So it unlocks the ability to cancel all Valor effects from the opponent as well, making it a very strong entry. And with the Hellion Cohort rule, it's able to make assaults within 6 inch instead of the usual 4, and with Fray 12, I can actually do a bit of damage as well. I mean, it's a ship designed to get up close and personal, because it has the Sturginium agitators, and again, it then gets a bit of extra oomph in the assault that comes as well, and that makes it a very interesting entry into the Enlightened roster, so one that is well worth considering, especially when you combine this with the Lamarckian barracks that we've discussed earlier, giving you even more punch in close combat. Combined with Elite Crew, yeah, it's a close combat beast. It's for those players who like to get up close and personal with their enemy and just blast them at short range. The next entry we're seeing is one of these preview entries that they do every now and then. It doesn't have a model out yet, which is why you don't see any model depicted next to it, but you know, it gives you something that you can play test with and try out, and send feedback should you so desire. So this is the Daedalus fortified Tethership. It comes in at 255 points, which is quite normal for a Mass 3 ship. But again, you get that thing where Enlightened ships only get armor 7, whereas most other ships, flagships from other nations, tend to be hovering around armor 8, and they don't really come with that many hull points before they go crippled, so expect them to be slightly more fragile compared to other nations. But that's nothing new really here for this weapon. Then, well, for this ship. Then what do you get? Well, first of all, you get the heavy particle cannon, which is something aimed at the front of the ship. And then you get a further particle beamer aimed towards the 270 degrees in the front, and an etheric lance, which is the bumped down version of the particle beamer, with a 270 degree to the rear. This pretty much makes it a more front geared loadout, missing out on a small etheric lance at the back. It's not the end of the world, so this is a fairly straightforward point and shoot ship. But what else does it bring? Well, you can swap out that heavy particle cannon with one of the new fancy weapons that we discussed earlier, called that Magneto Encapsulator, dragging everything towards the center of a blast marker, or the Gravitronic Imperilator for 5 points, meaning that you can pull things up in the air and drop them again for extra damage, which seemed like a very fun little thing to do. Or you can get that big smashy Sturginium Atomizer for plus 7 points, which was the one that functioned really well even at at closing range rather than just point blank range. So you can get some very heavy firepower from that turret at the front. And that's not the only thing it brings. It brings with it the very important Fortunes of War rule, allowing you to cancel enemy valor effects, which is great because only 255 points for something with Fortunes of War tends to be a steal already in my book, so I'm very much liking the sound of it already. It comes with an advanced repair facilities option with 3 extra dice on top of the mass 3, so you're chucking 6 dice, And the way that advanced repair facilities now works is that you just throw those 6 dice during your repair step, and you can use whatever dice you want from that pool on either the ship itself or any model within 4 inch of it. And you have to remember, they can actually repair some points of damage with this repair test if you roll exploding hits. So let's say hypothetically you throw your 6 dice and 6 out of those are all exploding hits. You made, a Yahtzee of exploding hits. Then you can pick 6 individual ships around it within 4 inch, each with a point of damage, and repair that one back up as well. However, if there's some counters in there, you can still remove some of the disorder conditions or critical damage markers nearby as well. So advanced repair facilities is now a very, very strong option. It also has the aerial repair platform option, meaning that once those flying sorcerers are going to be hitting, more on which later, don't worry, you roll an action die each time a friendly aerial unit is destroyed within 7 inch of this unit. And if you roll a counter or a heavy counter, it's not removed and it's just going to stay there with a single hull point. It's not that you're not going to be able to put it down very quickly if you're the opponent, but it does mean that that ship is still firing at you, potentially in the activation to come, so that can be quite tough. It also has an aerial shield projector, meaning that if you've got any flyers nearby within 10 inch of it, they count as having an extra point of mass for the shield generators they come equipped with. And I didn't see any flying units in this ORBAT yet that don't have shield generators. So during my prep work, that's pretty much all of them, and this one augments that one. It comes with an entropic generator, which we've discussed with the generators already, a Hellion cohort so it can assault quietly from a larger distance, and it comes with a shield generator itself to bump up its defenses, along with a magnetic generator, making it trickier for enemy SRS to take it down. So all in all, when we're looking at that ship, I'm seeing a super strong entry for 255 points. That brings a lot of utility to the table, along with one massive firing cannon at the front, so I'm liking it. Next up is the tried and tested Descartes control ship. It's one of the first ships that came out in the game. In fact, it was one of the first ship that came out in the game. It clocks in now at 240 points, which is slightly more expensive than what it used to be. And in line with all of the other Enlightened flagships, the armor has been reduced to 7, with a distribution of 6 hull points in battle ready and 6 in crippled state. So that hasn't changed at all. And compared to most other ships, they did not get a bump up in Citadel. So the toughness of these ships has gone down a bit. However, this is a laundry list of special rules, but it all makes sense when you dissect it though. Don't be too scared about it. But all of the rules on how the whale tokens and new orca tokens work are explained in this ship as well. So you get a very wordy entry, but they're fairly easy to understand. Let's talk about the model first. The model has one of these side-firing particle beamers, like I said, on both port and starboard, and a forward-facing weapon, giving it an ideal attack angle of only 90 degrees to the front. You preferably don't want to fight with this weapon in the side arc, with the ship in the side arc I should say, because then it can only fire 2 of the 3 weapons, and it does have heavy firepower as a rule, so you do want to make sure that your primary target is found in the front arc when you're piloting this ship. What else does it have? Well, it comes with this other token, I should say now, which is called the Cetacean Capacity. It can launch 5 either whale or, if you take the upgrade, orca tokens in its battle ready state, and 2 of them when it gets crippled. They perform cetacean attack runs. And what does that mean? Well, you launch one of your sea creature tokens, either orcas or whales, depending on whether or not you took the upgrade. These perform an attack run like SRS tokens do, with the following exceptions. They cannot be intercepted, so don't bother throwing any ADV dice pools, because you just can't do it. If the number of these sea creature tokens is greater than the mass of the attack run target, you gain devastating quality as well. So they don't have weight of fire, but they have a sort of an equivalent of it, where you just have to reach the mass of the ship and then you gain an additional devastating quality to it. And they cannot make attack runs on aerial or skimming units, so you can only send them out to surface units and submerged units. So yeah, if your opponent is fielding a lot of those, you're out of luck. Now, how does an attack run resolve? Well, then you have to go and look at the type of creature that you have sent out. If you sent out the whales, the visitor construct tokens, you have to send them out on an attack run within 20 inch of the ship. Now, as a small little caveat that I'm mentioning here, this one does come with launch tubes, and those launch tubes allow you to add 5 inch to that range. So read this as 25 inch for this particular Descartes ship. Each token, when it does an attack run, contributes 5 action dice, and they get the submerged quality, the piercing quality, and the sustained quality. And remember, earlier we saw on the top of this, if you reach the mass of the target, you do get the devastating quality to this as well. Because it's a weapon that has the submerged quality, your opponent does get to use their SDV value. In other words, you can't intercept them using your ADV, but you can defend against them using their SDV because of this submerged quality. What is the main difference then between the visitor construct tokens and the orca construct tokens? The orca construct tokens have a way longer range, which is 35 inch. However, they only contribute 4 action dice to the pool, but they still have the same qualities: submerged, piercing, and sustained qualities. So you're just losing out on dice in favor of extra range if you take the orca construct upgrade. And if you want to do so for your ship, it'll cost you an extra 10 points to have the flexibility to either launch orca tokens or visitor tokens, because as the next line says, this unit can still launch the visitor construct tokens, and you can actually launch any combination as long as you don't exceed that citation capacity of 5 and 2. So it's a crap ton of rules, but it's actually fairly simple in practice, we found during our games so far. And the other big thing that you have is normal SRS tokens you can send out to friendly targets to provide them with extra ADV or SDV when they are being attacked or when they're doing interception runs. These actually have a special rules to what happens when you send out your tokens towards friendly targets. These citation construct tokens placed in base contact with models in friendly units count as escort tokens for the remainder of the round, and they can be destroyed as normal, but doesn't really matter because you just remove them at the end of that turn, and so destroying them doesn't really help all that much, except for during the remainder of that turn. So you can just give something extra escort tokens as well if you want, but you can have no more than 4 of these construct tokens. And there's a good reason behind that, because those escort tokens don't just provide defense anymore in these rules, they provide you with +1 attack dice for a point blank attack, 1 point blank attack in the ship's activation, which can get very nasty very quickly, and they provide you with +4, well, if you take all 4 rolls, +1 I should say per token, during a fray, during an assault attack. So you can get some pretty nasty effects using the Descartes to send them out as escorts as well. And just as the extra icing on the cake, they came the Minesweeper rule as well, so you can just sweep those out, and the Mine Layer rule, allowing you to drop some of that. So if you're a starting player, this Descartes control ship is still an absolutely excellent flagship to include in your force. In fact, many people are very scared of these sea creatures because that's a very devastating attack. But I would always count the points cost as being 250 because you do really want to have that upgraded orca token alongside with it, just for the extra flexibility and the extra range that it provides. I am going to be brief about the next entry, the Oedipus, because it's a named version of the Descartes ship that I just discussed, and that was a very lengthy discussion, and you'll see it's pretty much a copy-paste of most of these rules that we have found on the Descartes as well. It just gains a few extra things like the Lamarckian barracks, found down here, making this one slightly better in assault still. Again, it can be a very clutch move to do that along with your cetacean escorts to create a very devastating Fray 14 attack on the target. And what else does it gain? Well, it pretty much swaps out all of the different particle cannons for Sturginium agitators, meaning you get an even bigger up close and personal attack craft. You do have to remember though that this one cannot swap out for extra orca construct tokens, so this very much is the up close and personal version of the Descartes ship if you want to take that one. The next one is the tried and tested Hypathia generator ship, and you will find that it has been nerfed in a few ways. It's still, much like the Descartes, a front-firing weapon system with all three particle beamers being aimed ideally in that front arc, because that's where they overlap. And they still have heavy firepower as a rule, allowing you to do quite a lot of damage to the enemy. But the big thing about it is a generator ship. And what is a generator ship? Well, you can have all Mass 2 ships within 10 inch of this one benefit from the same generators that this model had. That is a big nerf, because that used to also apply to Mass 1 ships. That is no longer the case. This unit cannot have more than one type of generator, and it is stipulated in the generator section that you can never benefit from the same generator twice, so creating overlaps doesn't really work with that one. However, it automatically comes with a shield generator, and then you can still take 3 of the following generators, and the one that I personally recommend for beginning players especially is a combination of the magnetic generator, the shroud generator, and then any of the other ones to your liking. Because if you take all 3 of these, you will get all the benefits, defensive benefits, within 10 inch of this ship, and that's when it starts comboing nicely. When I say at the start that this ship was nerfed, I could have said deservedly so, because it was such an insanely strong force multiplier in this force that even with the small nerfs applied to it, it is still a very good entry into your Enlightened fleet. You can still do a lot of havoc with it. And I'm very quickly going to discuss the Prometheus alongside of it. This is the named variant of that Hypathia, with the big difference being that it's 5 point cheaper, but it comes with that temperamental design limitation that it cannot make any jury-rigged repairs. That is the only difference. This is a case of the named version being slightly weaker than the original one, but if you're struggling to find those 5 points, this can be a reason to downgrade to it. Next up is the Icarus Auronautic Fabricator, and that pretty much sounds like the cousin of the Daedalus, and when you're actually looking at the different weapon loadouts that it has, you do get a lot of similarities between these two. It still acts as an advanced repair facilities unit, only slightly less so, and it basically swaps out a lot of that utility that was found on the Daedalus to create a 245 point carrier that has 10 SRS tokens, which is quite a lot, and you have to remember that these Enlightened SRS are even trickier to intercept than the normal ones, so yeah, expect to get pummeled by a lot of SRS tokens if you use this ship as your main flagship. Other than that, though, there's not that much special to be found with this one, because it comes with 2 small particle beamers with a 360-degree fire arc. I imagine they're somewhere on top of that launch bay that it has. Comes with heavy firepower, but again, I wouldn't use it if you've only got 2 particle beamers to begin with. So this one very much acts like a main carrier within your fleet, but considering its points cost and the amount of tokens you get out of that one, it's a very efficient one. With that caveat, of course, that it is still an Enlightened ship, being slightly more brittle and slightly easier to cripple than those of other nations. And why was I calling that new Icarus so efficient? Because this is the Nansen Explorer, which acts as the second type of carrier, which is one of the Mass 4 Archimedes builds variants. And when you look at that one, this one is 335 points, and it only has an SRS capacity of 6/4 compared to the previous one, so there's definitely a big difference in the efficiency, but there's also quite a big difference in the weapon loadout to start off with. This one coming with 2 Weirdling torpedo salvos, although it's one aimed to the front and one aimed to the back, so don't expect those to stack up. And then still 4 particle beamers, 3 of which are going to be able to cooperate in all arcs except for the aft one. So it still combines firepower with some SRS capacity, so it's slightly stronger that way. And it gives you some extra logistical support, so you get 1 extra victory and valor card in your player's hand, and at only 335 points, it does clock in on the cheaper end of those Mass 4 ships, so I still think it's a very interesting option. And having looked at the actual kit itself that makes this one, it seems like it's fairly straightforward to swap out between the different builds, so it gives Enlightened players even more ways to play around with these builds than ever before, so don't discount this one, it's still a solid option if you ask me. And then the final big flagship that we're going to be seeing is called the Thule Sky-fortress. The Sky Age has come here with this Sturgeonium Skies box, and the Enlightened are going to be joining these as well. And traditionally in the Spartan era days, they had a lot of flying sorcerers sort of things, and yeah, this Sky Fortress is no doubt one of those. It's based heavily on the extraplanetary craft discovered by a count in Portugal, and yeah, it's going to be weird science turned up to 11 with these. It's a Mass 5 ship, so I'm expecting to see another massive box drop when this one gets released. And when you look at what it has, it's frightening, isn't it? It's got 2 of those X-ray laser banks. It's got the heavy particle cannon, all of them with 360-degree firepower, so that's scary enough. And then heavy etheric broadsides that you can fire in all directions and can stack together as well, along with some electrostatic vacuum bombs pointed at the rear, so that does look amazing. And then you add on top of that the fact that it's got an SRS capacity of 8/4, so it also functions like quite a lot of carriers of any other nation. Along with some of the most hull points we've seen, this looks like an absolute banger when it's going to come out. I mean, Speed 6 along with Drift 5 and the Agile rule means that you've got something that can get to wherever it wants to go almost as fast as some of the most nimble cruisers found in this game, especially with a turn limit of 10. This thing is nimble, it is tough, it packs firepower up the wazooks, and it comes with a lot of SRS carry capacity and shield generator on top to just give it some extra more toughness to go with as well. I mean, take a look at it, and I would be massively surprised if that points cost was still 385 when the actual model releases. But hey, test it. I can only imagine what a game with this one would look like. But hey, that's why they're beta rules, I suppose. And it does mean that the Enlightened have got something very, very big and exciting to look forward to. So that's the very positive takeaway from this one. And that's us done with the first Flying Saucer, only to move on to the second one, the first non-flagship entry we're covering today, and that's the Adamski Patrol Saucer. That's still a Mass 3 saucer, so that seems like a big thing, but it's not called a flagship. And when you look at the different rules, there's no model yet, because it's not out yet. When you look at the rules, it does feel slightly more brittle, with only armor 5 and citadel 11 and 5 hull points. You're going to be able to take that one down very, very quickly, but mass 3 along with speed 7 and turn limit 10 with agile means that these things can just turn on a dime and go wherever they want, much like the Sky-fortress version. And at 145 points, it's not even that bad. It does come with slightly fewer heavy etheric broadsides than the flagship counterpart, but it does come with a single X-ray laser bank as well to go along with it, so packs quite a bit of firepower. The agility is bumped up even more by giving it the power slide rule, which is a rule that allows it to drift up to 90 degrees to either port or starboard instead of just going ahead. You combine that with agile, and like I said, that thing can just go wherever it wants within 10 inch of where it started, pretty much. And they can deep strike as well, should they so desire. So yeah, this seems like a massively exciting entry. And out of all of the flying ships, it seems like the Enlightened really have got this one down to a T, and they are paying way more than most other nations, because 145 points is still quite a beefy points cost for this type of toughness. But yeah, fast, heavy hitting, it's got Enlightened written all over it, doesn't it? The next entry is the Ammo Carrier Frigate. It doesn't have a model out yet, but it has been tweaked slightly. Much like other frigates, they now have 3 hull points to help them along with a bump to Citadel, although you have to keep in mind that with Citadel 10, this is still one of the lowest values you can find in the game, so these things can still be one-shot fairly easily. However, these are, as far as I know, one of the only Mass 1 ships that bring SRS tokens with them. They do have an SRS capacity of 1-0, and that 0 can just be ignored because these ships can't go into a crippled state to begin with. And at only 33 points for one of them, well, I should say only 33 points, it's an annoying one, isn't it? Most factions pay around 120 to 130 points for 4 SRS tokens, and so, these are probably slightly more annoying to destroy to begin with, but, it doesn't really convince me all that much. There seem to be more effective ways of getting SRS tokens in the Enlightened list than this Ammo Carrier Frigate. So I hate to be a downer, but this one does get a no from me. I would just get the carriers, or rather the SRS capacity, elsewhere in this list. Next up is the Antarctica Superiority Cruiser. That one has been with us since the very start, and it was made slightly cheaper. They chipped away 5 points from the cost. They did give it a bit of a bump up in Citadel, but it's not quite as close to the Citadel 12 that you find on other factions, so there's still of that fragility from the Enlightened built into it. And what is this weapon or this ship all about? It's all about that heavy particle cannon that it touts, and one very subtle change that you may miss when you're reading at this one. This unit now comes with heavy firepower. So if you take a unit of 3 of those, you can fire those nice front-aimed particle cannons at full lead value to create one hell of a blast to just take apart anything. So there's definitely more of a reason to opt for the Antarctica Superiority Cruiser, because I have to give a small spoiler: the cousin that changes out that rear turret for just the smaller etheric lands is, because of this rule, no longer the de facto choice. I mean, you can just upgrade to an Antarctica Superiority Cruiser to put that heavy firepower rule to work if you take a full unit of it. If you're not taking a full unit of it, I would probably still go for the Copernicus instead of this one. But yeah, other than that, it's great really what they've done to it. There's more reason than ever to take your traditional ships as well with these new ORBATs, and that's something I personally really like about the game. Warcradle Studios does try to ensure that even your older ships are still relevant despite new and amazing things being released, and this Antarctica Superiority Cruiser new rules are definitely a good example of that. The next model we're discussing is the Belgica, and I have to be honest, this is a unique named version of the Antarctica Superiority Cruiser, and I was already hinting at that you sort of want a unit of 3 of those to make the most out of its rules, especially that heavy firepower rule, and this version sort of falls absolutely flat on its face, because it has 2 weapons, the Sturginium Agitators, that cannot benefit from the heavy firepower rule to begin with, so that's a bit of a womp womp. However, it does come with the Agitation Harmonizer, so you do get +2 to attack dice pools and gain the sustain quality with these agitation weapons, so that does make it quite a bit stronger. And with Maritime Patrol, it can aim that at submarines as well. And yeah, you know, there's a few big submarines coming into this game very, very quickly, or there already are a few big submarines in this game, so it might not be a total waste of points, but at 180 it is incredibly niche at what it can achieve, and therefore hard to justify as well. It does come with a shield generator on top of it as well, so that's some extra toughness built in too. So, but I think it's a bit too niche of a ship to just consider in and take all comers lists. I'll just end it with that one. Next up is the Chatelet Recon Cruiser. That's pretty much a cheap version of only 90 points, where you get a heavy front turret, but you have to make do with a small etheric lance in the back, and it does come with a cheeky little 1 SRS capacity. Now there's a bunch of rules like Spotter and Maritime Patrol, which it just so happens to have, that make good use of single spotter tokens, so this ship does have a role to play in this fleet. And seeing as it comes with Vanguard and is a very fast ship, I could see this work. It does come with very low armor and very low citadel for cruisers. And there's a few of those in the new Enlightened list, so this is a way to get some more bodies on the table, if you will, for those cruisers. But don't expect them to stay around for too long with this armor and citadel value either. But, as always with all Enlightened ships, they pack a an absolute absurd amount of firepower for their size. So this pretty much is a ship that just epitomizes this glass cannon playstyle that the Enlightened seem to have. So, and keeping that in the back of your head, it's a ship that I would consider because all the other ones are so expensive within this army. Next up is the Claudius Merchantman, and when we're looking at the point cost for a Mass 2 ship, 65 points isn't a lot, but also when we're looking at the actual model from the Claudius, it's not really packing a lot of weapons either. It just comes with that torpedo salvo to the front, as you can see, and then a Seeker rocket battery mounted on one side and one on the other. And that Seeker rocket battery has a 270 degrees side firing profile, making this ship ideally shoot at the front arc as well. So if you find this type of chassis difficult to figure out as a new player, it very much is a front firing profile that these ones have. Also, it comes with a spot for a generator in the back, so that is included in its already low 65 points cost as well. And this ship isn't all about the firepower, as you can imagine, but more about the utility that it brings. And there's quite a lot of that, so keep this ship as a potential build option as a new player, because it brings you Minesweeper, allowing it to clear out opposing mines if they are deployed. You get a supply depot, meaning any friendly model within 7 inch may remove a single level of disorder at the start of their activation. And weapons on friendly units may reroll blank results on the limited quality action die if they are within 7 inch of this unit. There's a few support ships that shoot missiles that can can sort of run out of ammunition with a bit of bad luck, and this one protects against that. Also, to continue the utility theme, it has useful freight, meaning once per turn on their activation, each model in this unit may look at the top card from their victory and valor deck. That used to only be for the whole unit, so there was no point of ever taking more than one Claudius Merchantman in this unit, but now it's per model, so it stacks. So hey, this one has been upgraded as well. You can either discard the card or return it to the top of your deck. So it's not like you can just draw extra cards with these ones, but if there's like a bunch of cards coming up that aren't to your liking or are very, very low in value, because that's more important than ever in this game, you can just get rid of them if you so desire. So that is a way more useful thing that they have. And if you're willing to bump up the points cost by almost double, 70 points, it can become a Q ship. And what does that do? Once during the encounter, at the start of the unit's activation, a single battle-ready Claudius of the controlling player's choice may be immediately replaced with the Q ship, and that is either a Plinius, Quintilian or Tacitus model. It's a bit gimmicky, but it can be quite fun, because do not carry over any damage sustained by the replaced Claudius. The problem with this is, if your opponent does shoot at it and manages to cripple it, it only has 4 hull points after all. You can't use this rule anymore, making it an absolute point sink if you do. But if it does target it, and it does like 3 hull points of damage, you can just repair that one up as well by using this Q-ship rule. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I'm not sure if I would want to make that ship that much more expensive. I have played around with it before, but I wasn't massively convinced by it. But hey, your mileage may vary. That's the fun thing about this game. There's nothing stopping you from trying it at the end of the day and having a bit of fun with it, so go ahead and do so. I like this model. I don't mind having one of these in my army every single time, mostly because it's so cheap to fit in at 65 points and it brings so much utility with it. So there you go. The next entry is one I briefly touched upon when I was discussing the superiority cruiser, and that is the Copernicus heavy cruiser. Now the Copernicus and the superiority cruiser, the Antarctica, are nearly the same frame. The main difference is that the Copernicus swaps out the heavy turret in the back for a smaller etheric lance. And that just instantly changes this ship to having a nearly full front firing profile. Why? If you lose out on shooting that etheric lance, it's not the end of the world, you shouldn't be too worried about that one, but you can just easily use the heavy particle cannon, the particle beamer, and the Weirdling torpedo salvo all neatly aimed towards the front. However, compared to that Antarctica superiority cruiser, this heavy cruiser does not get the heavy firepower rule, so there is a big distinction. You do chafe off a massive 17 points and get the added benefits of a clearer front-facing profile, but you lose out on that rule as well. So I actually think that makes the toss-up between getting a Copernicus or Antarctica cruiser unit a more difficult one to decide, but also a more interesting one for it. Next up is the Diogenes torpedo submarine, and let me just be blunt about this one. Every single time I have taken it, it has impressed me a great deal. I mean, it's an enormously handy little ship, comes with a full-sized Weirdling torpedo salvo on a cheap 35-point platform, and now gets 3 hull points, although it still only has that Armor 4 Citadel 10 defenses, but being a submerged unit, it's not the end of the world because you will get a bit of toughness for it. It comes with maritime patrol, but I wouldn't read too much into it because it means you can ignore the submerged trait. But let's be honest, almost all of the heavy lifting is done by the Weirdling torpedo salvo, and torpedo salvos are weapons that you cannot be obscured with to begin with. So what's the point of having the submerged trait? I suppose maritime patrol can work if you've ever, or if you're trying to fire the pulse broadsides, but let's just not beat about the bush. That is very niche. So that rule, maritime patrol, don't stare at that one blindly. You do not need any SRS capacity if you want to field Diogenes torpedo submarines, because it makes almost no difference. But that doesn't mean this is a bad ship. Quite the opposite, like I said. It's one of the best entries they have. Next up is a Dorrien corvette, which is an entry that I'm not sure is going to be an actual new model, or if it's just the old Marion / Germain Zebec hull that swaps its main weapon out for a Sturginium agitator, because the stats are identical. It's just that that weapon is completely swapped out. So, and at 38 points, it's still something that's worth considering at the end of the day, because Sturginium agitators do hit hard, but you have to remember that they have got limited capacitors. We'll discuss this more when we get to the Marion and the Germain Zebec. It means that you always have to use the crippled value of the weapons instead. And that was a nerf in general to the whole Enlightened fleet that was long coming. It was a bit ridiculous to have these small ships with full cruiser-sized weapons running around, and I'm kind of happy that they've been able to swap it out to this rule now. That makes it way more balanced and actually more fun for the opponent as well. So, but interesting entry. You can get some very cheap Sturginium agitators on these models, and I think it's just a turret drop-in, so why not give them a go? And straight after the Dorrien is that Germain Zebec that I was mentioning earlier. It's now 34 points. It's gotten a lot tougher than what it was. I mean, also the same armor 5 Citadel 10 as the Dorrien, but it comes with the limited capacitor rule for the particle beamers. And on the particle beamers, you do notice it. Not so much in the point blank range, because then they're still shooting quite well, but on closing and long range, the particle beamer does drop off significantly in the number of dice, and that made me kind of fall out of love with the Germain Zebec. And when we get to the Marian frigate, you'll see why. The pulse emitter is still one of those weapons that you want to fire at point blank range, but then just becomes way more efficient than that particle beamer ever was. So it's not like it's useless by any means, but it's just the choice between this one, the Germain Zebec, and the Marian has become a lot trickier, and I'm finding myself gravitating more towards the Marian, but I'll discuss why when we get to that ship. The next entry is the Haunebu battle saucer. It's another flying ship, and like I said with the first one, agility up the wazooks. I mean, turn limit of 10 with agile and with power slide, along with speed 7 and mass 3 means that this thing's just going anywhere it wants, but it's even more expensive than the Adam saucer that we saw. But it makes sense when we're looking at the weapon systems, because it gains that heavy particle cannon compared to the previous saucer. And yeah, if you want to see my thoughts on that one, make sure you click on that one if you missed it for this new saucer, because yeah, this is a very strong one. It doesn't come with an expected arrival, if I'm not mistaken, but this one comes with strategic withdrawal, so it can always go back to be placed in reserves if it wants to. But if you find that you have any crippled units, crippled models, I should say, in your unit, then yeah, they're instantly destroyed. So these are more of a strike and retreat type of craft, making it an even more interesting entry in my book. Speaking of interesting entries, these two are absolute doozies, and apart from being absolutely amazing models, like you can see on this Ketos machine, they are pretty damn good in game as well. They are classed as Mass 2 models, so they don't drift too far, but they are fairly decently armored and have a good citadel value with a hull point stat that is more than acceptable to do some work with. And well, when you look at the points cost, fairly reasonable for these types of machines, because it comes with a laundry list of rules, as you can see. The first one being the fact that they've got a better attack with their Sturginium agitator, which is already a great deal. It's a fairly shooty variant. It can come up with unexpected arrival if it wants to, and when you do arrive with unexpected arrival, you have to use any crippled stats for any shooting attack. So the Sturginium agitator is a very fun entry, but don't expect it to shoot too well on the term that you pop out of the ocean through unexpected arrival. It can also do the strategic withdrawal, so meaning if you've popped up and you want to pop up elsewhere, you can do the withdrawal and then just pop up again in the next turn, should you so desire. It can drop off some mines for some added utility, and yeah, it's a Colossus, meaning it can turn at any time to face any direction, and it can ram surface units and skimming units even if it didn't move too fast. That is important because it does come with some extra ramming equipment to go along with the shooting attacks. So this one has the potential to burst out of the water, do one hell of a devastating ram on your opponent, and then in the next turn start causing all kinds of havoc with the Sturginium agitator, or withdraw again to do that ram elsewhere. And to make it even more spicy, if you want to, you can start using Valor effects with these one through the Apocalypse protocol, and that means that any crippled models in these units can immediately be destroyed. Each model destroyed in this manner automatically inflicts 2 catastrophic explosions on any model within 2 inch. This includes their own unit, mind you. It's such a powerful ability though that your opponent can always attempt to cancel the Valor effect and doesn't need an additional rule to do so, but that means that it can come up, cause a whole bunch of damage on one ship, and then if your opponent wants to retaliate, You have to be very careful to do so, because if it leaves it in a crippled state, you can actually blow it up through this apocalypse protocol and take that ship that it already damaged, no doubt, through the ramming, take it down with it. So I think this is just a very fun little entry to play around with, and yeah, the model is absolutely gorgeous, so I can't wait to get my hands on these. The Lawton is the alternate build option compared to the Ketos, and you will find that there's quite a few similarities, but you also pay a bit of extra points for it, and that's because it's got a few extra rules to go along with it. It can still do the heavy ramming and smashing attacks, blow itself up like I discussed with the Ketos. It's still a Colossus, so it can turn at any spot and ram even if it didn't manage to, you know, travel the necessary 3 inches. But it gets yet another Valor effect as well, and that is the Nemesis protocol. You can use the Valor effect, and instead of making a ramming attack with the CS Shockmaw, which isn't a problem because you can still do so with the Blade Claws and not ram with the Shockmaw, it can be used in the shooting phase in the 4 arc to make an attack against an initial target with a heavy particle cannon profile. That attack ignores shield generators, storm generators, guardian generators, shroud generators, pretty much all of the defensive generators. That's very strong ability, so your opponent can always attempt to cancel that one if it so desires. And you do have to keep in the back of your mind as the Enlightened player that if you're doing this on the turn that you're popping up, you're not just using the shooting attack from a particle beamer, you're using the shooting attack profile, using the weapon's crippled profile like it says at the bottom of the unexpected arrival. So that's more of a using it on the second turn that it's been up kind of an ability. But it makes for a very interesting alternate variant compared to the Ketos assault machine. It's kind of cool that the whole head has been replaced with a weapon system as well. So yeah, big thumbs up for me. Next up is the tried and tested Loveless cruiser, although I have to say this is probably the most backbone cruiser that was changed the most out of any faction. If we're just being honest, the previous Loveless cruiser was way too efficient for what it did. To the point where just spamming Loveless cruisers would give your opponent a massive amount of headache, along with those Germain Zebecs that I already mentioned, that there was some heavy tweaks to it. The Loveless frame is now a way more brittle frame than it was, with only Armor 5 and Citadel 10, so that's already quite a big loss. Armor 5 is slightly compensated for it having an entropic generator, of course, but that's still a nerf, let's be honest, compared to the inbuilt generator that it used to have before, but a deserved nerf. Let's just be absolutely clear about that one. This is the cruiser that you want to have if you do want some more bodies on the table, like I said. And with the speed it has, with the amount of firepower it has, it is still a very, very strong entry, even at 96 points. I mean, I was not disappointed when I was trying out a unit of 3 Lovelaces anymore, but it wasn't as ridiculous as it was before, because, yeah, let's be honest, it was. It does come with a few extra weapon options, so you've got some more loadouts that you can experiment with if you've got the old tried and trusted design, and yeah, play around with it. You'll see that it's not nearly as bad as that armor drop makes it seem, so. Another classic entry is the Marian frigate. It's been with us since the very early days of the game, and there was that tweak that we mentioned along with all of the ships that share this hull to have limited capacitors. But I already mentioned with the Germain Zebec that I still like this version quite a bit more. The pulse emitter is a weapon where you have to get up close and personal with your enemy to begin with, and if you're in point blank, even if you're using the crippled profile, you're still benefiting from that combination of sustained and fusillade. So its role hasn't really changed all that much. It has just been dropped down from that ludicrous 8-6 profile to a still more than respectable 5-4 profile. And I say more than respectable for a ship of this point cost and that size, because this thing still absolutely slaps anything it comes close to, even with the limited capacitors. And another reason why I'm more drawn towards this design is because it's 34 points. If you add a third one to it, you trigger the Pack Hunter ability, giving you some more extra dice as well. It's not like that's new, it's always had that. But you've got a unit that hovers around the 100 points mark, and that is perfect to put into reserves. My units of Triple Merians put in reserves have worked so well for me. I mean, they're cheap enough to not notice when they don't show up, but when they do show up, you're gonna notice when those pulse emitters instantly drop into point blank range of the enemy. So it's still one of those ships that I keep coming back to, and I think you should still consider it as well. Next up, we have one of the new designs made with the new Advanced Cruiser set, and that is the Newton Void Engine Cruiser. Clocks in at 121 points, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is the build variant that I like the least out of all three of them. The new Advanced Cruiser isn't exactly a very firepower heavy ship. It only comes with etheric lances, both at the front and the back. It comes with the etheric broadside, so that's very similar to the other cruiser, but it doesn't even come with the torpedoes. So you're losing a lot of firepower. This ship, therefore, is not brought along for its firepower, and when you're paying 121 points for it, that's a bit on the steep end of the scale. And you'll notice why when I discuss the Void Engine next. The Void Engine has got unreliable written all over it, sadly. I get what they're trying to achieve with this ship. I mean, it's supposed to be the random element in your gameplay, but I'm just not comfortable playing that heavy a points cost for something that is so random. Why? During its activation, a single model in this unit may declare that it is using its Void Engine. So only one of them. Taking 3 of them makes the points cost even more ludicrous. Let's start off with that one. You can then target a friendly or an enemy unit, only if they are mass 3 or less. So you can't, start trying to move your Archimedes types of ship. They have to be within 15 inch in this model and within its 4 arc. So yet another limitation, this ship somehow has to hang behind all of the other ones. When you achieve all of that, you roll an action die. If it's a blue result, a counter or a heavy counter, it just does nothing. You've just had 121 points with the firepower of a frigate sat there doing nothing 1/3 of the time. If you roll a blank, you immediately resolve the effects of a Sturgeonian flare on both this unit, so it's damaging itself, and the target unit. If you were targeting one of your friends, you're just ruining their day by giving them slightly more forward momentum because of a Sturgeonian flare. Depends on their mass now, but you give them a point of damage as well. Luckily, you don't apply any critical damage markers, so you're not just opening the floodgates for extra catastrophic explosions, luckily. But that's what happens on a blank. If you roll a hit or a heavy hit, which is 1/3 of the results, each model in the targeted unit is removed from play, and you can replace it within 5 inch of its original position facing any direction. So that's good. That's a very nice little result. You can move 5 inch closer to wherever you want it to go. Must be placed in coherency, has to be placed in open water, and at least 5 inch from the play area. And again, you can actually teleport enemy units away as well, but you do have to be kind of lucky, and it only works on 1/3 of the time. you know. Each additional model in this unit, so if you're starting to spam a unit, you can add 2 inch to the target range and the distance the target can be placed. So only on 1/3 of your effects is adding units or models to this unit gonna have any effect, which already makes it a very dumb choice to expand this unit with something else. Because if you roll an exploding hit, the target unit is removed from play and placed into reserves to begin with. Now imagine that you do that on a unit that you have that has not yet activated. If you want to use them or move them forward, you have to target something that hasn't activated yet. Otherwise that 5-inch movement isn't really going to amount to much. And if you're then unlucky to roll a critical hit, that thing's going into reserves and might not even pop out of it even. You can maybe compensate by taking a ship with a chronolath, but then you have to make sure that you never activate that thing before you activate the Newton Void Engine. The whole thing is just so convoluted and so niche and so random for such a grotesque amount of points that I honestly don't recommend building this ship at all. I'm really not liking it. If you do like it, make sure you drop a comment down below so I know what I'm missing, but I'm just not seeing it, sadly. Luckily though, this plastic sprue builds some of the most amazing alternatives that the fleet has to offer, so just skip out on this one, pretend it doesn't exist, and be very happy with your purchase if you have made it though. The next entry is one of the best ones I think that the Enlightened has, and it's made out of the same sprue as the previous Newton cruiser I talked about, and that's the Origin Lath ship. It comes in at only 62 points, which is already a very appealing points cost for any Enlightened player to begin with, as everything tends to be on the expensive side. And what does it provide? It gives you the advanced repair facilities of 1 extra die. So you can start making repairs with 3 dice because it has mass 2, and with that you can start repairing other ships and have an amazing flexibility to go along with that. The other thing it does really well is function as an automata repair platform, and the Enlightened do have all of their mass 1 ships are automata, and you can roll an action dice each time one of those mass 1 friendly automata are destroyed within 10 inch of this unit, so it has a nice generous area of effect to apply. And if you roll a counter or a heavy counter, the automata is not removed and instead remains in play with a single hull point. That's great because they are mass 1 automata. If they're at 1 hull point, they're still pretty much firing at full capability, so this is an amazing ship, especially because you can simply attach it to said automata units should you so desire, and you can attach this to any other ship that you want. So this is an amazing deal. Again, you're not taking this for the firepower, but you're taking this for some really truly amazing utility within this fleet, so this one gets the big thumbs up from me. The next ship is the Plinius support carrier, and when I see a support cruiser clocking in at 147 points, my first gut reaction was like, that's too much for something with an SRS capacity of 4 of 3. But in all of my playtesting so far and all of the tests that we've done with it, it's just come out as such an amazing ship. I mean, it still combines that good torpedo salvo that the Enlightened have, along with Seeker rocket batteries, and these things are sort of in between a regular rocket battery and a heavy gun battery, so it's a decent amount of firepower. You stack that on top of with the cloud hunting, giving you extra attack dice when you're shooting at aerial units. You get the additional benefits of all of the new SRS range that you get with it, along with the very hard to intercept tokens, and I can totally see why this thing is 147 points. It's been an absolute beast of a unit every single time we've deployed it. I've never used the unit of 3 of them, mind you. I've always kept it to units of 2. And this is something that is hard to get within the Enlightened fleet. A lot of these Enlightened units are all about getting close to the enemy, and this is an entry that just sits back, peppers the enemy with long-range torpedoes, long-range rocket batteries, and extremely long-range SRS tokens. So it is very specialized in what it does, and what it does very, very well. So I'm absolutely loving the Plinius right now. From one entry that I absolutely loved to the one that I have my reservations about, which is the Praxilla Hunter submarine, clocking in at 38 points per model. And I just have a hard time justifying this one. It's not that it's bad per se, because when these things ram, they're gonna absolutely ruin something's day. I mean, for Mass 1 ships, that can put out a horrendous amount of damage. But the problem somewhat lies in the fact that there's that Marian frigate in the same list that is also just geared towards getting close to the enemy, but has the advantage of being able to do something at point blank range without the need to touch the opponent. Because let's be honest, this Praxilla Hunter submarine isn't exactly a speed freak at only speed 8. That would have been fine for a cruiser, but not for a Mass 1 ship, so it's not exactly very fast in what it does. I mean, it does have the submerged unit trait that helps out slightly with the amount of damage it takes. You can put it in reserve, same as the Marian, if you want to, but it just comes with the downside of needing to be able to hit your opponent and touch him, so they have to be within 8 inch of a board edge for you to get that first strike in if you use this unit in reserves. The Marian doesn't have that. The Marian can just do that one at 18 inch, and that to me has at least been more flexible during the games, making me skip out on the Praxilla and taking Marians instead. But again, if your experiences are different, the damage output of the Praxilla is higher, mind you, but it's a choice between extremely devastating and just regularly devastating. And then regularly devastating with more reliability is just the thing I like better. If you disagree with me, make sure you sound off in the comments below, because other people can read these as well. Next up is the Quintillion Bombard Cruiser, which is now bumped up in Citadel, which is something we saw across the board from all factions, so that's not necessarily a big thing compared to the other ones. It's the one that has Spotter, because it can use the missile systems. Those are the Tyndall cyclonic missiles, and they gain the sustained rule to it. Now, sustained itself has been changed quite a lot, has been nerfed quite a lot, so the damage output of the Quintillion Bombard Cruiser has been slightly reduced. And when I was discussing the Plinius, that's one of the reasons why I was liking the Plinius slightly better than this variant now. The Plinius also just is the type of ship that hangs back and peppers the opponent with long-range firepower, and the Quintillion Bombard does that as well, but just does that slightly differently, so these two are sort of competing for the same role. The big thing though is that these cyclonic missiles do have a blast template, which is incredibly useful obviously, but they also sort of compete with the Copernicus and the Antarctica superiority cruiser that we saw earlier. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with building these. You're going to get quite some good damage out of it, but it's sort of in an awkward spot in this ORBAT, because there are other blast options and there are other options to hang back, and this is by no means a bad entry, but it's not the no-brainer option that it used to be. Just probably a healthy point for the game to be in, when there's actually choices that you have to make when selecting your fleet. So Next up is the Stiletto Fast Cruiser. It's a cruiser that only clocks in at 82 points, which is already, like I said, a very low amount of points for an Enlightened fleet. And it comes with that same low amount of armor and citadel that the Loveless now has. This is essentially a Loveless that trades its rear turret again for an etheric lance, making it a more straightforward firing profile. And given its speed with the full steam ahead rule allowing you to double the drift during the movement step, and that massive speed 10, this is one of the fastest surface units that you can find in the game, and so it still very much serves a role within the fleet, the giant ORBAT from the Enlightened. So this is an interesting build option if you're a new player and you want to prioritize a unit that just crosses the board very, very quickly and still bring quite a lot of firepower to wherever it goes very, very quickly. So yeah, don't feel bad if you've built this one. It's a very good entry. Next up we have the Tacitus Assault Cruiser, and I think this is actually one of those ships that had some very interesting changes to it. It's a ship that I would have never considered in the previous ORBAT, because it was outshined by the Loveless at every single turn, the much more points efficient Loveless. But that one was rightfully nerfed, like I've mentioned, and that means that the Tacitus Assault Cruiser at 130 points is now a more interesting choice, because you get the very high toughness out of it, with armor 6, citadel 11 and 5 hull points in battle ready stage. You're not just crippling that one straight away, especially if this is now a ship that still has both the regular generator and the entropic generator, bumping up that toughness in general. It still comes with the focused gunnery, so it can make more use out of those two front-facing particle beamers that it has. It has the perfect front-facing profile, and it actually has its close combat abilities boosted as well through Lamarckian barracks. So you've got an increase in toughness, you've got a bit of an increase in firepower now with the changes to the particle cannon and the combination with focused gunnery, and you've got an increase in the amount of assault potential this ship has. So it went from something I would never consider before to something that makes me go like, might have to pick up another squadron or so to make 2 of these to give me some of that assault gameplay that is pretty hard to find in that Enlightened ORBAT, so it definitely has its place now. The Ulysses Vanguard Cruiser. It's one of those ships that previously I said don't consider it, there is the Loveless to go for, and again with the Loveless being toned down to more reasonable levels, this one has moved up in the rankings as well. It still clocks in at 110 points. Its armor did not get dropped to 5 like the Loveless did. I think it has to do with that slightly beefier superstructure that these weapons have, because the Antarctica also didn't see that change. And so this one is still very much at that level that that our old Loveless was. And it has gained the anti-air specialist rule, meaning that this unit can choose not to count aerial units as being a range band further away. You have to refer to the rulebook to make sense of that one. Instead, this unit attacks against targets with the aerial trait can be measured at the actual range band indicated for the distance. And attacks with the aerial quality against aerial units gain the homing quality. That is particularly nasty now, because sustained was nerfed. There was a compensation in the number of dice they get, but homing allows you to reroll blanks. So you get the reroll blanks and another result of your choice when you're firing at aerial units, and aerial units can never count as being obscured against attacks from the Ulysses. And this thing really just went from 0 to hero in this new ORBAT. It's a super good entry to take, especially with anti-air specialist and Vanguard. it can find itself firing at aerial units very, very quickly, because those tend to be quite fast as well moving forward. And yeah, it went from an entry I would never consider to one I would strongly consider in this new ORBAT. The Valtar Ether Saucer is the somewhat in-between saucer that's coming out as a flyer, clocking it at 160 points, which is still quite a lot, given the toughness values that it has, but we've discussed this with the other sources as well. And it brings all of that firepower and mobility that goes along with it. Yeah, I have to repeat myself when I'm talking about this one, alongside the other saucers. You can play a bit with the different weapon loadouts, but they're fast, they're agile, they can do whatever they want, but they're not very tough. So glass cannon gameplay all the way for these things. And you know, if you can, play around with them, test them. I'm pretty curious to see what your findings are. The second to last entry is the Vesalius Cetesian surgical ship, which clocks in at 120 points and is sort of the baby brother to the Descartes control ship. It's got way less Cetesian capacity, of course, only having 2 and 1 for this ship, but it can have the option baseline to send out the orca construct tokens. And we've discussed this when we were talking about Descartes. I refer back to this or that part of the video to show you what it all does. And it can upgrade the whole unit in one go to also carry whale tokens, the visitor construct tokens, for 10 points. So if you're taking a full unit of this one, it clocks in at 370, and you can just go all the way in with lots and lots and lots of whale tokens if you want the, not the flying circus, but the submerged circus to go along with it. And in addition, this unit does come with the mine layer as well, so if you're going for that build along with the Descartes, you can really just pepper the whole battlefield with mines, and then just send out whale token after whale token after whale token, which I think should be a fun little option. And it's again a very valid entry for that new advanced cruiser. So yeah, definitely, it's more of a choice of how many of these advanced cruiser options I want to buy, because as you'll see, the last entry that we'll see in this ORBAT deep dive is another one of these, as another absolute gem. That absolute last gem in this ORBAT is the Zumina capacitor ship. It's only 60 points, again cheapest chips compared to all other Enlightened cruisers. You don't take it for the firepower, as it only has an etheric lance at the front and the back, with some broadsides to go along with it. Doesn't even have torpedoes, so again, you're definitely not taking it for the firepower. However, the most insane rule it has is the power transfer generator. When you look at the model itself, it is a floating generator. And what does it do? Well, each time any friendly model within 4 inch of a model in this unit makes an action, you can just add 3 action dice to that action dice pool. Now, there's a whole heap of things you can do with action dice pool. It's super flexible. However, this is a bit weird wording, but okay. The model in this unit, meaning the Zumina unit, that was closest to that friendly model suffers a disorder token when it does so. Now, the weird thing is, I don't see any options to take more than 1 Zumina in this entry, so I don't know why they're specifically mentioning the fact that it is the model closest to the friendly model. There's just the 1, as far as I can tell. So you are just taking damage as you use this generator too often. And you want to be careful with, because, well, maybe for new players, an explanation. If you take disorder tokens, if you're already at chaos and disarray, the 3rd level of disorder, you are starting to eat damage for doing so. So you can't just use this with an unlimited capacity, right? Why is this a dangerous thing? Because of the last rule. It's also a volatile ship, meaning if you cause a catastrophic explosion, they cause a model with this rule to suffer an additional point of damage each time. I mean, that sucks, but that's not the end of the world. The end of the world is the next line. If a model in this unit is destroyed, any other model within 3 inch suffers a catastrophic explosion. That's the really bad part. You can drain it for power if it doesn't repair itself enough, but when you overdo it and it does blow up, or your opponent just goes like, I've had enough of this thing, I'm just gonna focus fire on it, you better make sure that you've calculated and measured your distances correctly, because it can go wrong really badly and blow one hell of a big chunk in your own fleet if you're not careful. And the good thing about this ship, the last good thing about it, is it can act as an attached unit to any Enlightened ship. So this one can act as a mobile power reserve, but just like with lithium-ion batteries, be slightly careful where you place them, or things can go wrong really badly. And there we have it, a monstrous ORBAT deep dive for one of the largest factions there is in the game that is not divided up into any of the sub-nations. So thanks very much for sticking with me. If you did make it to the end, again, thumbs up so other people can find this video for Dystopian Wars, and I do hope to see you in the next one. Bye!